excited, hoping for this occasion to be a conversation starter. My idea is to go over some of the basics of how is recycling working for us in this aim towards sustainability. So I'm going to share my screen, and if you have any questions or comments, please write them out in the chat box, and then I'll address them afterwards. So today's webinar, that, like I said, hopefully will be a conversation starter, is can we recycle our way out of this mess? And the reason why this is the topic is because it's often portrayed, recycling is often portrayed as the way out, as what we need is more recycling. If you recycle more, then we won't have pollution, we won't use as much energy. And the way what we need in order to recycle more is just people wanting to recycle more. Like, we don't recycle more because citizens are not doing their job, they're not doing their part. So I'm gonna try to bring down this myths and hopefully open up some questions that will get you closer to the topic. So my name is Alonso Muñoz. I work at the Department of Environmental Development at the University for Peace. It's raining quite strong here, so hopefully the sound will be okay throughout. And the Department of Environmental Development has two master's programs. One of them, I'm the coordinator of the one called Responsible Management and Sustainable Economic Development. And what I'm going to be talking about today is we go a lot more in depth in a course called Circular Economy. So if you decide to join us at UPeace, or if you have been at UPeace and you want to come back to take a course, if this topic seems interesting, then we can talk a lot more about it. So let's get to it. Let's get to it. It's already 1:10, so let's not delay it any further. So when we want to address the question in today's topic, can we recycle our way out of this mess? What I'm gonna be talking about today, I'm gonna mention a couple of definitions that are important. We tend to think that the topic is a little bit simpler than it really is. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the current state of the system, which probably you know, and that's why you're here. I'm gonna talk about what's being done in the developed countries, like have they figured it out, and the developing countries we haven't, and we have to copy what they're doing. And how can the system be improved? And what can we do as individuals, as individual people? How can we do to improve the current system? So, can we recycle our way out of this mess? Is another way of phrasing that question is recycling the way towards sustainability? And this is actually quite complicated. The first reason why it's complicated is because sustainability is quite a big word. We have the SDGs, and there are 17 SDGs, and they touch upon different aspects. Some of them are directly environmental, even though all of them impact each other. So just the fact of sustainability, defining sustainability, is part of the question. The second aspect is what recycling really is, which is what I'm going to be focusing on this afternoon's session. So what is recycling? Recycling, when asked this question, people tend to think it's simpler than it really is, like I said. And there are different organizations, different institutions. There's not a worldwide accepted definition. The one I'm showing right now, it's from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency from the United States. And they say that recycling is the process of collecting and processing materials that would otherwise be thrown away as trash and turning them into new products. Again, this doesn't really take us much closer to understanding the definition. For example, what does trash mean? Like, is trash anything that we're not going to be using anymore? So does it matter the state of the matter? Does it always have to be solid? And turn them into new products. What does new product mean? Most probably, when we think this definition, what we think about when we talk about recycling is the typical glass bottle. So we have a glass bottle, we process it, we melt it, and then we create another glass bottle that it's exactly the same as the first one. That's a beautiful process, but how many materials can we actually do that? Because this is going from one product to the same product, and in between there's a process. Now, if I get this bottle and I paint it and I put a light bulb in it, and then now it's a lamp, would that be called recycling? Let me take it even further. If this bottle instead of glass was plastic and I burn it and get energy out, so now the product is electricity, would that be recycling, for example? Those questions that you might have said in your head, you might have answered yes or no and no, or yes and yes, depending, are not defined worldwide. There's not a institution that's worldwide in charge of deciding these things. And actually, the waste to energy, which is what I just said about burning the plastic bottle and turning it into electricity, for some regions is accepted as recycling, and for others is not. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that. What I'm going to go back to is the fact that this kind of recycling, the bottle to bottle recycling, rarely happens. Even when this is what we tend to think when we think about recycling. What happens with the glass when it gets processed is that it becomes another glass bottle, and that's perfect. Even more perfect is the fact that you can have a glass bottle be turned into another glass bottle that it's not exactly the same. And this is what happens in nature. When an animal dies in the forest, then it would be its carcass would become nutrients to something else. It's not going to come back as the same animal. And so in different materials, different things happen. So in the case of plastic, for example, a plastic bottle, the best thing that can happen, not the best thing, because the best thing would be bottle to bottle, which rarely happens, but it does. So let's be clear that most of the cases, what happens with the plastic bottle, it's that it becomes processed into flakes, and these flakes become this kind of thread. And this thread that I'm showing in the picture then becomes clothes. And this H&M t-shirt, for example, it's 74% recycled polyester. There's a huge growing trend because of pressure from the public for companies to offer more and more recycled materials in their garments. Like this 74% polyester in H&M. I looked all throughout H&M, and this was the one that had the highest percentage in that particular store, at least. And so this shirt used to be plastic bottles. Now, the problem, even when this might seem like, oh, wow, this is great. It is great on the sense that we're not using new polyester to make the shirt. We're using bottles. That's great. The not so great, though, is that this combination of polyester and cotton and other things cannot be recycled any further. So once this shirt is no longer, like when it's stained or when it's scratched or when it can no longer be worn, then most probably it will end up in the trash. So it is a good recycling, but it's not the recycling that we had in our heads about the glass bottle being processed and being another glass bottle. And that process can happen infinite amount of times. In this case, it's called cascading. So let's slowly introduce the fact that it's not so simple. The other way, which is very similar, is just that we see it differently, is for all those plastics that are hard to recycle that eventually get recycled, a lot of them end up in something like this. And this is called something like plastic wood. Maybe you have heard about this, maybe you have seen it, maybe you have sat down on these kind of benches. They use it a lot for benches because it's bulky and thick and you don't care too much about its appearance. And this, again, is the same process. They're getting plastic that it's usually hard to recycle, though most of it is plastic bottles, which are the easiest to recycle. And then given that they can't make plastic bottles because they're beautiful and shiny and see-through and nice, what they do is the recycling industry, they turn it into plastic bags or plastic benches or something that it's called, that it's downcycled. Instead of recycled, it's downcycled into a process, into a product that it's not such of a high quality as such. Again, the problem is when this bench is destroyed or when you need to change it or when you need to move it, then you'll have to throw it away. The other thing is that, yeah, maybe the bench will be there forever, But that's not stopping the creation of new plastic. We're just finding places to put the plastic that we already have. But then the hose is still open and we're still flooding the planet with plastic. So this is not really the solution of recycling that's going to take us out of the mess, is it? So just because something is recyclable doesn't mean it would get recycled. And this is paramount. When you look at a bottle, a plastic bottle, they always say 100% recyclable, meaning that, yeah, it can be recyclable. But it doesn't specify what does it need for it to get recycled, and even less, it doesn't tell us if it's actually going to be recyclable. Because for something to be recyclable, it needs to be technically recyclable, like meaning that the plastic or the material can be technically reused again, and it has to have a system that will allow it to be recycled. And this is what I mean again with when we say technically recyclable, or when a bottle says that it's recyclable, they're not really telling us much. It's recyclable under what circumstances? Is it recyclable at the MIT lab of materials? Can they recycle it? Or is it recyclable out in the street in Costa Rica? Or is it recyclable in the outskirts or the rural parts of Guatemala? Because those are three very different settings. And the fact that it's recyclable doesn't give us much information. And the fact that it's systemically recyclable means that there's a system that would make sure that that particular product would eventually get recycled. So not only are we not so sure about what the word recycling means, but also it's a lot more than that, because recycling in a void doesn't exist. It needs a system. So one typical example of what I'm talking about is, for example, this everyday product, which is just a deodorant. This deodorant is all plastic and it would be recyclable at the MIT lab, or in Costa Rica, in a place that would take the time to separate all the different pieces of plastic, because this deodorant is made of 4 or 5 different kinds of plastics. And plastics, in order to sustain the quality, they have to be separated by different qualities, by different types, I'm sorry, if you want to sustain the quality of the product. If you smash them all together and recycle them, the best thing you can get is something like the bench that I just showed, that it's not really getting us out of any mess. And so this particular deodorant, in order to get it separated, first we would really, and I encourage you to do it back home, most likely you'll have a deodorant somewhere. Next time you run out, try to put them all apart, like set all the pieces one by one. Then we would have to perfectly clean the drum that's filled with the deodorant, because the plastic needs to be cleaned. The glass, not so much, because it's processed at very high temperatures. Plastic is processed at not so high temperatures. So we need to perfectly clean it. And then the real challenge begins, because where are you going to find out what kind of plastic is each of the pieces? There's not a law, a universal law or requirement for products to say what kind of plastic they are. So you would have to make tests, like lab tests in each of the different pieces to know what kind of plastic they would be. And then you would have to take them somewhere to have them recycled, but then you would have to convince them that it's clean and that it's the kind of plastic that you're saying that it is. So clearly, if you ask the company, Gillette, is this recyclable? They would say, yes, the plastic in there is 100% recyclable. But then the context, the system, the technically recyclable aspect of it being economically feasible for it to get recycled, it's not. So for us to really recycle, to improve, to increase the amount of recycling that we're doing as a society, we definitely need to change the products as such. It's not just a consumer's morality that needs to be lifted for you to stop being so lazy and take it to the recycling center, because that's not the way it works. The other aspect is that there has to be a system that allows it. And let me show you something that I think it's quite shocking. Recycling at the end is a business. The places where recycling doesn't happen is because that process of recycling is more expensive than the process of just getting new materials. And that's why a lot of companies just prefer to buy new material, because it's always clean, completely, it's always the same. They know the quality. When they're using recycled materials, not so much. It might be dirty. It might be a different kind of plastic that went in. Someone might classify it the wrong way, etc. So how do they decide? How do companies decide which materials to use? Well, they would decide most probably on price. But look at the price. The glass bottle beer like this one, this is a traditional beer bottle. This one is in Costa Rica, but it's the traditional beer bottle, the size and etc. You would need approximately seven of these bottles to make 1 kilo. And 1 kilo is worth $0.08 US. That's current prices. That means that collection centers need around 84 bottles to make $1. That's what they get paid in Costa Rica. So 84 bottles to make $1. So in order to make money, in order to survive, in order to make it a thriving business, they need thousands of bottles. And it's even worse in plastic. 42 bottles, give or take, of this. This is the closest bottle, plastic bottle that I had to show you, but this one I picked up in the ocean, but you understand the plastic bottle that I mean. 42 bottles of this make up 1 kilo. And 1 kilo is $0.18 US. That means that collection centers need around 200 bottles to make $1. 200 bottles. So imagine having 200 bottles and being paid $1. And so this is, once you give them to the company, like when you're giving it to the company. So imagine paying transportation for it. Imagine paying someone to set them apart, to classify them. Imagine paying someone to clean them if they're not cleaned already. So, and then all these prices, they have to be shipped somewhere where there's a company that's processing this glass and a company that's processing this plastic. And so when we see these numbers, we understand that the margins are so small that it really needs help in order to make it happen, or most likely it won't happen, like it's not happening right now. Because even when companies like H&M are buying them, and there's other companies that are buying recycled plastic, of course, the amount that it's being bought, it's far, far less than the amount that's being produced. And that, I'm just talking about the plastic bottles that are the easiest ones to recycle. So imagine everything else. Everything we own is plastic. My computer, my phone, the mouse I'm holding right here, the headphones I'm using to talk to you, all of these are plastics. And all these plastics are never gonna get recycled because the price to recycle them would be a lot more expensive than buying a new one, if we don't account for the externalities, for all the negative consequences that these products are going to have at the end of their life. Whether we bury them in a landfill, which is most probably what's going to happen for this in Costa Rica, or they end up in the environment. Wherever you are, there's a risk of any of these two happening. And as long as those are seen as externalities, then new material is always going to be cheaper than old material. So if we don't have the technical aspects and the system to make it work, like a system to bring them back, it's going to be really hard for recycling to really live up to the expectations that we have in our heads. And that's why it's not surprising that less than 10% of the plastics that are sent to a collection center eventually get recycled. And these are very complicated numbers to have, because maybe in developing countries, the recycling system is a lot more robust. But in countries like Costa Rica, for example, this number would be a lot lower. And it's going to be hard to have a valuable worldwide number. Regardless if it's 12 or if it's 6, what we know is that the amount of plastic that is being recycled, and I'm talking particularly plastics because metals and glass have slightly different values, but it's all similar. And plastic is the one that has the biggest consequences. So around 10% gets recycled. So how come it's so messed up? Like we explained the complications, but let's see a little bit further. So a lot of the plastics, like the ones you see in this speech, there's a lot of different kinds of plastics. They end up in the ocean, they end up in the beach. When the plastic gets in the environment, the qualities change, like the one I showed you. This one was in the ocean. I'm not sure for how long, but you can totally see it's no longer see-through. It's a little bit harder, like I could almost break it if I pressed it. And so these bottles, even when we pick them up from the ocean or from the beach, they're never going to go back into the recycling stream because they simply have different qualities. A lot of the plastic that ends up at the beaches, at the coasts, end up in the ocean. And so a lot of the plastics that we find or that end up in the environment eventually end up in the ocean. Something very problematic is that most of the plastics don't float. Plastic bottles, we tend to think that they float because they're full of air, but when they get destroyed, like this one was not when I pull it out of the ocean, was not too far away from breaking, and once it breaks, it gets filled with water and the plastic sinks. So we have already found plastic in all the oceans, and with a lot of consequences that most probably you have heard. So we're filling the ocean with plastics, and regardless of what is being said, far from recycling, just picking it up is proving to be a nightmare. One of the reasons is just like this bottle, because pieces break in smaller and smaller pieces. So we get part of the microplastics end up in the ocean. So we're having the urgency to improve our recycling facilities, our recycling system. It's not because it would be a nice to have, but actually because the consequences of not doing much with it are proving to be exploding in our face as we speak, because more and more we're having consequences of it. Maybe you've read the news a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, about microplastic being found in human blood. And when I read that, I was actually not surprised at all. It was just a nightmare waiting to happen, because I mean, it was obvious that by our relationship with plastic, it was going to happen eventually. So what's up now with the recycling system? The recycling system has been broken for a long time. However, it was back on January 1st, 2018, that China decided to stop buying the developed countries' scraps that was being sent as recyclables. It was labeled recyclables, but most of what they got was just garbage. And China decided that it was no longer going to be the country's waste bin, they said. And so they restricted, it's not that they stopped buying recyclings, that's not the correct headline. What they did was they restricted what is it that they're going to accept. And they increased the quality of the materials that they were receiving. So they're no longer receiving diapers or trash like yogurt cans that are dirty, like all that recycling that was coming from the developed countries, mainly US, Canada, and Europe. They were being sent to China on the boats, on the big ships that were going back empty. They were carrying this plastic, and China said, okay, let's stop. And even when the system had been broken for a long time, this made it particularly clear, because what happened was that the developed countries realized that they didn't have anywhere to put their trash. And so, just as this editorial says, maybe the only way to solve the problem is to stop making so much trash. And I think this is true for California, as it is true for the question that brought us here in this webinar. Can we recycle our way out of this mess? Most likely we cannot. And not only that, but maybe the best way to get out of this mess is to stop producing so much trash. The question, when you read the headlines about developed countries that they recycled 100% of their waste, or they import trash because they're recycling so much, actually deals more with the definition of recycling than the actual aspect of recycling itself. And this is, for example, Sweden is one of those countries that recycle, or is said to recycle, huge amount of their trash. But actually, what this recycling is accepting the definition of waste to energy plants. waste to energy plants are all this, that it's clearly trash. This is not nice bottles or coherent materials. This is just trash. It's all plastic, maybe, but what they do with this is that they burn it at a very high technological, well-developed facilities. Don't get me wrong. I'm not 100% against them. What I'm saying is that this is not recycling. This is burning trash or getting energy out of the trash. Remember that plastic comes from fossil fuels. So they're getting energy out of it and they're producing electricity from it. And under the EU standards, there's a discussion of whether this is a renewable source of energy or is it not. On one hand, it's renewable because you'll always have trash unless we change the system. On the other, it's clearly not, given that we are burning plastic that is coming from fossil fuels. So anyway, what I wanted to make sure is that we all understand that the complications of dealing with our solid waste and recycling is not a poor country's problem. It's actually worldwide. And this is the case of Sweden, that has an amazing waste management systems, the best in the world, along with Korea and along with Singapore, along with Denmark, but they all are going to the same way. They recycle a lot, and everything that cannot be recycled, as we often refer to recycling, gets burned, and they're producing electricity this way. So let me show you, this is what actually happens to most of our plastics. Most of our plastics, what happens is that 98%, around 98% comes from virgin feedstock. This means fossil fuels. And that's about 78 million tons a year. This loop was defined in 2013. So this is definitely much bigger now, but this is to give us a sense of what happens. Around 32% of the plastic ends up in the environment. And like I said, most of it ends up in the ocean eventually. Around 40% gets landfilled, meaning that it's being buried. This is what happens with a lot of Costa Ricas. Around 14% is being incinerated. And this is interesting because given that it's a really high number if you think about it, 14%. But the thing is that the developed countries that are the ones that incinerate their trash are also the ones that produce the most trash. And so that's why this number is so elevated. If we took out the developed countries, this would look very different in the developing countries. And 14 is sent to being recycled, out of which 4% never gets recycled. 8% ends up in something that it's a lower quality of material, like the shirt I'm wearing, or the shirt I showed you, or the bench that I showed you, or the plastic wood, etc. And only about 2% end up being closed loop recycling, meaning that the product becomes the same product it was. And so this is quite complicated. Like, how can we greatly improve this? How can we make this look much better? For time's sake, and I would love to sit down and chat about it, but I'm gonna jump to the solution, or what is it? How can we greatly improve this? Because otherwise, I'm just telling you bad news. And the thing is that we have to realize that our recycling system is completely broken. We need to change. We have to stop blaming the consumer and the lazy person for not recycling, and really go to the root of the problem, which is that the products themselves, the system, the collection, the way we think about it, nothing is made for us to really increase this recycling. Even if every single person in the world decided to start recycling tomorrow, the systems wouldn't hold, because most of the products are not meant, like the deodorant that I told you, are not meant for them to be recycled. So what can we do? What can we do? Well, like I said, the first thing is realizing that our business as usual is grossly inadequate. Just like the colors of this slide, they're completely inadequate. We have to rethink what business as usual. Business as usual means the way we do business, the way the system is set up, the way it produces and transports and consumes what it produces, etc. So we need to comprehend that we need to change that system, improve it in a lot of ways. And the good thing is that we know we have really good ideas of how can it be improved. And this is where circular economy comes into play. Circular economy is not about burning down capitalism. It's about how can we have this very productive system that we have, but what are the tweaks that we can do in order to have it be being not so damaging to the environment, to the consequences, having the environmental consequences that we just saw, and also all the social consequences as well, because pollution is directly tied to poverty. Not that they make the pollution, but that they suffer the pollution. So I'm going to give you just 3 ideas of circular economy that would hopefully understand where this is going to. And hopefully, if this seems interesting, like I said, send me a line. We can start a conversation or join us here at UPeace. And everything that I'm going to present, a book that changed my life years ago is Cradle to Cradle, an amazing way of understanding the system. You can check him out. And if you more directly to Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a lot more focused on circular economy as such, as what we understand as circular economy today. So what I'm going to say, it comes from ideas from I mean, Ellen MacArthur based itself a lot on Cradle to Cradle, but there's a lot of interesting ideas that are taking shape and that are being pushed in different systems and different organizations that are trying to do things better. So let me show you, just like I said, 3 things that we need. The first and most basic thing is that we need to understand that there's 2 different cycles or systems living together in our system. One are products that we consume, and that's everything that comes from the biosphere. Those are the things that we eat, or those are the things that you could find in nature. And then all the other, which are technical nutrients, which are mainly metals, minerals. And so when we mix these 2 together, it's chaos. Like, for example, composting plants, if you live in a city where you get your organics collected separately, or if you have a composter in your house, then everything you put in that composter, everything that gets picked up in the composting facility belongs to the biosphere. That's food scraps, that's leaves, that's grass, that's depending on the facility, bones, eggshells, etc. Everything that are part of the technical nutrients are glass, are metals, are aluminum. And there's a big problem when we mix those 2 together. Like, for example, most landfills receive trash that it's a mixture of both systems. And when you have a mixture of both systems, it means that you cannot recycle the technical nutrients and you cannot compost the biological nutrients. So setting them apart is the first basic thing. If you want to reduce your footprint, your carbon footprint, actually, the biggest simple thing that you can do is separate your organics and compost them. We produce a big part of most probably your carbon footprint is the methane from the organics that are right now ending up in a landfill. If we have no organics in the technical cycle, then the trash is not going to be dirty because it's just going to be plastic and glass and aluminum. And those can be easily recycled. I mean, much easier than if it's rice and glass and aluminum, etc. This is a perfect example. This is just the Tetra Pak. Maybe you have seen it. Most likely you have. And this is a great product because it's really lightweight and it protects very well the product inside, but it's made out of cardboard. That cardboard is from the biological cycle, aluminum and plastic. So this is a great product when you leave all the externalities aside, but reality is that this cannot be processed. And the fact that it cannot be processed means that it ends up in the landfill. So the rule of thumb is that if it's inseparable, it goes to the landfill, just like the deodorant that I showed. And if it goes to the landfill, then it will become inseparable because everything that's in the landfill right now most likely will never get recycled later. So that's the first one, keeping those 2 apart. The second one is that we need, if we're serious about improving our recycling systems, we have to make sure that there's a collection system. If you want to buy something, it's very easy. You just go to the supermarket. If you want to recycle something, it's not so easy. So we need to make sure that there's a collection. And let me give you a good example, which is your cell phone. I'm pretty sure that wherever you are, there's a drawer with old phones, at least one old phone or one old computer in your house that you have nowhere, like you have no idea what to do with it. And this is a good example of something that is very valuable. The electronics inside a cell phone are very valuable. It's easy to recycle, yes, because it's so valuable that it pays for having someone dismantle it, like disassembling it and using the parts that can be used. However, what we don't have is a collection. It's a way to retrieve all those phones that we have in our house that right now should be at the industry, but there's no connection. There's the broken link. Every now and then you would hear places where you can take your electronics, but it's mainly like places that show up, unless you live in a very developed country, which it might be the case. But if you don't, then most of us have the big issue that we don't know what to put with our cell phones. And now slowly companies are understanding that this is super valuable and that they should be getting it back. And now, for example, I read that the future iPhones, I don't know if the next one, but soon, they're going to be like lent to you. You're going to rent them so that by the end of its life, you're just going to go with and take it back. Either way, right now, you can go to the Mac webpage, and you can see how much would they pay you if you give them back their phone. So they're slowly moving this way, but this is something that we have to work. So the second point is we need to have systems that make sure that collect all the bottles that right now we use, or the materials or the products, that at the end of their life, instead of questioning now, what do I do with this, that there would be a system to take it back to wherever it's going to be used. And the third one is a concept that it's quite basic when you think about it, but we have grown not to think about it this way, but it's the fact that waste, it's a design flaw. So whenever you buy a product that produces waste, that waste is wasted resources, wasted energy, wasted inputs. It's just bad design. And before you think, well, some things are going to need it, I challenge you to think that actually what we need is better design. And that design, again, it's not something that the end consumer can do. It's something that starts right from the designing, the conceptualization of the product that's going to be sold. So the zero waste design, again, I encourage you to check it out. It's super interesting. And I'm just going to give you, this is a perfect example because of the material of the toothpaste, then the tube has to have metal and paper and metal and plastic, because you have to keep it dark and it has to be sealed and you cannot have oxygen to it. But this is a recyclable nightmare, because you cannot recycle this toothpaste. So this would be a perfect example of where we can say, well, but then we do need it, because how else are we going to keep the toothpaste? But then when you start really thinking about it, you can come up with a lot of different alternatives that are just equally good, that are zero waste. For example, this is a toothpaste. It's just that it comes in these small capsules. And at the end, you could either recycle the glass that could come back as a different bottle or a different product, or just refill it if you can find it. So this kind of new business models for the new era is exactly the kind of thinking that we need if we're really talking about, okay, we need to tackle the urgency of the consequences that we're doing with our oceans and with the environment. And just to wrap up, the million-dollar question is, okay, so what can I do? I'm not going to start a system that collects, and I'm not going to start a company that rethinks everything. That's kind of true. You could, but that's true. I think that this phrase most probably resonate with a lot of you, and it's, as consumers, we have much power to change the world by just being careful in what we buy. I agree with Miss Emma. However, I'll take it a step further, because consuming our way out of this mess doesn't seem like the best way either, because then we're just encouraging more consumption. And in a way, yes, let's support the initiatives that are trying to do things differently. I completely support that. However, if Miss Emma allows me, I'm just going to slightly change what she says. And I think as consumers and as voters, or even more important, as citizens, we have so much power to change the world by being careful with what we support. So supporting companies with their purchases, sure, but also supporting politicians, supporting nonprofits that need help, supporting activism, supporting our fellow citizens that are trying to do things better. Because what's often said, if you left your house and the water was running, and when you come back, there's a flood everywhere, instead of mopping the floor, the first thing that you would need to do is close the tap. Because right now we're trashing, literally trashing our place, and we don't have a plan B. So what we need, maybe, and with this I'll wrap it, is the fact that maybe what we should do is rethink development. We have been very successful at getting to where we are right now, but there has been tremendous consequences of doing so. And that's why I want to leave you with this short paragraph that I took from actually Cradle to Cradle. And it says, traditionally, the average amount of wheat produced in Eastern Germany per acre has been only half of Western Germany. Remember that Eastern Germany was part of the communist bloc for a long time. So after they're reunited, there's a huge difference between Eastern and Western Germany, because the agricultural industry in the West is far more modern and efficient. However, the Eastern region's inefficient, more old-fashioned agriculture is better for the environmental health. It has larger wetland areas that have not been drained by overtaken by monocultural crops, and they contain more rare species. These wild marshes and wetlands area provide vital centers for breeding, nutrient cycling, and water absorption and purification. Today, agriculture all over Germany is becoming more efficient, destroying wetlands and other habitats, resulting in rising extinction rates. I think this, and this is the way Cradle to Cradle is written, I think it just says so much about what we understand as development. And maybe this never-ending race towards efficiency and reducing costs might not be the best way. And I think that every single country on the planet would want to have Eastern Germany productivity, but at the same time, it's an irony that the old-fashioned less efficient, it's far better for the environment. And this is where I call to maybe challenging development, and rethinking of our system is what we need. And I just gave you 3 hints of what circular economy is, but we can go much further into it. Thank you so much. It's been everything. I'll stop sharing and I will. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's any questions or comments. Please type them into the chat box if there are. We still have a couple of minutes before we get to the hour. And so if there are questions, I'd be glad to respond them. If there's not, then it was already a pleasure, which is kind of weird talking to, because I don't see you, but you tell me. Yeah, so a question about compressing trash to make it bricks for buildings. I think that's a great question. And it's actually, I think that right now, doing so would be a little bit like mopping the floor without closing the faucet. because we don't know the quality. Like if you visit a place where they make building blocks, the certifications and the standards and the measurements that they have to go through are super rigorous, because I mean, you don't want to build a building and not knowing exactly the resistance of each of the building blocks. So compressing trash to make bricks for buildings seems like a good idea, especially if trying to find a place to put all the trash that we generate. But at the same time, it doesn't seem to be solving the underlying issue, which is that we are producing tremendous amounts of trash. So, like I said, I know of a company here in Costa Rica. Actually, it's a social enterprise that uses plastic to make bricks and to make homes. And that's an interesting project. However, it has been quite complicated because the price they need to sell the blocks in order for it to be economically feasible to run the company is not really making the cut. So it's an alternative, one of the many alternatives that are out there. Thank you very much. Yeah, yeah, but even when these materials are not easy to recycle or process, there's a golden rule. And the golden rule is that when you have a lot of the same material, then you can do something with it. So if in your town they started collecting materials, even when they're not traditionally recyclable, I'm sure that if they collect enough, some entrepreneur in high school or in university would definitely find something valuable to do with it. However, it might not be economically feasible, like I said, and therefore there's only a limit of how much you can scale it up, but definitely it would be a solution for what you guys find. Yeah, so that's a super sad, important question. It says, what happens when we collect plastic out of the ocean? I've heard that many initiatives such as beach pickups and communities don't have the capacity to dispose of it anyway. So it just ends back in the ocean soon after. That's super sad. And that is in a way a reality. Hopefully what would happen is that after it gets picked up, it's going to be trucked into a city where it can be buried in the landfill. So that's the best solution. That's the best alternative that can happen to what gets picked up. And when it does, most likely it will be buried for the years to come and not end up in the ocean. So there's a positive aspect of it. However, to give you my honest opinion, I think the most important aspect of cleanups is not so much how much they get clean out of the ocean, but it's actually the sense of urgency and impotence that you feel when you're doing these cleanups. Every time I do a cleanup, I just remind myself why I got into this field and why I need to work to make a change. Because every time I'm there, it's like, it feels like no one has ever cleaned. Last time this happened in December, last December. We were picking up and we picked up, it was a group of 30 or something, and we picked up several bags, big bags of plastic, mainly bottles. And when I asked the organizer, the organization that helped us with the cleanup, when was the last time someone picked plastic here? And he said, well, it was a Friday. And he said, well, last Saturday we were here. So it had not been a week. And it was already completely filled. And all the people that joined, it was a group of UP students, among others, we were all touched by the fact of, wow, it is real. I mean, it is real. We have to do something because otherwise it's just here. So I think that the biggest value of those plastic collections, hopefully they won't end up in the ocean, but the biggest thing that they do is they touch people and remind them of why we need to act. So I think after long thinking about this, the question is, what are some of the highest impact policies that we could implement to promote recycling or disincentivize using disposable materials? And that's a great question. And what a lot of countries are doing is it's a group of policies. And the first one, which is probably the basic one, is look for who is the responsible entity for collecting the waste in your country or in your community. Most likely you'll conclude that the responsible entity is a municipality or a local government. And then there's a mismatch between those who are producing the trash and those who are responsible for collecting it. When you have that mismatch, there's no incentive for the ones producing it to produce less. So the biggest policy is, it's called extended producer responsibility. When you extend the responsibility, this figure is usually, it's often used for hazard materials. But when we extend it, and a couple of states in the United States, if you Google, you'll find information about it. Maine and Oregon recently passed laws that extends the responsibility of the producers to share the cost of collecting and processing that trash. And so by doing so, you suddenly, the companies in Maine and Oregon, and many in the European Union, for example, and in Canada as well. It's just that these two just did it in the US. But, and that's why there's probably news and comments and things. But just by extending the responsibility of the producer all the way until the end of life, you're saying for every ton of waste you put in the street, for every ton of waste of packaging that you put out in the street, you have to pay this amount to help the local community collect all this trash. And just by doing so, companies are immediately incentivized to start figuring out ways in how they can put less trash into the environment. So hopefully that's a fulfilling answer, but that's, I think if it was just one thing, I think it would be that one. And it's definitely just like the question asked, it's definitely something that has to do with the producers a lot more than with the individuals. Right, all right, so thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your questions. Hopefully you'll think about this in the upcoming days and have brilliant ideas of how we can improve the system. Thank you so much.